The locomotive's whistle pierced the desert air like a mourning dove's cry, announcing its arrival at the dusty depot of Coyote Springs, New Mexico territory. The year was 1872, and the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly upon the wooden platform, making the air shimmer like water over the endless expanse of sage and sand. Clara Matthews pressed her gloved hand against the grimy window, her heart hammering beneath the stays of her traveling dress. Boston seemed a lifetime away now, though it had been merely 10 days since she'd boarded the first of many trains that would carry her to this desolate corner of the American frontier. Her mother's lace handkerchief, damp with perspiration and perhaps a few tears she refused to acknowledge, twisted between her fingers. "End of the line, miss," the conductor announced, his weathered face creasing with what might have been sympathy. "Coyote Springs." Clara rose on unsteady legs, smoothing her dusty blue traveling suit with trembling hands. The fabric, once crisp and fashionable in Boston's refined streets, now hung limp and travel-worn. She gathered her courage along with her carpet bag and made her way to the door. The heat struck her like a physical blow as she stepped onto the platform. Dust swirled around her boots, coating the hem of her skirt instantly. She blinked against the brilliant sunlight, searching the small crowd of rough-looking men and weather-beaten women for the face she'd seen only in a photograph. Jacob Carter, her husband-to-be, the rancher who had paid her passage west in exchange for her hand in marriage. The depot was little more than a wooden shack beside the tracks, surrounded by a collection of sun-bleached buildings that comprised the town. Clara could make out a saloon with bat-wing doors, a general store, a small church with a crooked steeple, and various other establishments that seemed to lean against each other for support against the relentless wind. "Ain't Mrs. Matthews?" Clara turned at the sound of the deep, gravelly voice. The man who stood before her bore little resemblance to the photograph he'd sent. The image had shown a younger man, clean-shaven and smiling. This man was older, harder, with a week's worth of stubble shadowing his jaw and lines carved deep around his eyes by sun and sorrow. He wore canvas trousers, a faded blue shirt, and a wide-brimmed hat that cast shadows across his face. "Miss Matthews?" Clara corrected softly, then felt foolish. After all, she would be Mrs. Carter soon enough. "Mr. Carter." He nodded curtly, his gray eyes sweeping over her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Disappointment. Resignation. "You're smaller than I expected." Heat flooded Clara's cheeks that had nothing to do with the desert sun. "I assure you, Mr. Carter, I am quite capable of hard work despite my stature." "We'll see." He reached for her bag without ceremony. "Wagons this way." Clara followed him through the dusty street, acutely aware of the curious stares from the townspeople. Women in calico dresses paused in their errands to whisper behind their hands. Men lounging outside the saloon tipped their hats with knowing grins that made Clara's skin crawl. "Mail-order bride," she heard someone mutter, and the words stung like nettles. The wagon was a sturdy affair, built for utility rather than comfort. Jacob tossed her bag into the back with a little care for its contents and offered her a calloused hand up to the bench. His touch was brief, businesslike, but Clara felt the strength in those work-hardened fingers. As Jacob climbed up beside her and took the reins, Clara caught a glimpse of something unexpected in his profile, a profound weariness that spoke of loss and loneliness. The photograph hadn't captured that. Neither had his letters, sparse though they'd been. "The ranch is 2 hours north," he said, urging the horses into motion. "Hope you're not expecting anything fancy." "I expect nothing more than what was promised. Mr. Carter. A roof over my head and honest work." He glanced at her then, surprise flickering across his features. "That's all." Clara thought of her father's gambling debts, of Mr. Thornberry's wandering hands and whiskey breath, of the marriage her father had tried to arrange to settle his accounts. She thought of her mother's grave, still fresh with spring flowers when Clara had said goodbye. "That's enough," she said simply. They rode in silence for a while, the wagon wheels creaking a rhythmic complaint against the rutted trail. The landscape stretched endlessly in all directions, rust-colored earth dotted with gray-green sage. Distant mesas rising like ancient sentinels against the cloudless sky. It was beautiful in its starkness, Clara supposed, though so different from Boston's tidy parks and cobblestone streets that it might have been another world entirely. "You ever been on a ranch before?" Jacob asked suddenly. "No, sir, but I'm a quick study. I can cook, clean, mend, tend a garden." "Can you shoot?" Clara blinked. "I beg your pardon. A rifle. Can you shoot one?" No. Is that necessary?" Jacob's jaw tightened. "Everything out here wants to kill you. Miss Matthews, the land, the weather, the wildlife, and sometimes the people. If you can't defend yourself, you won't last a month." The blunt words sent a chill through Clara despite the heat. "Then I shall learn." Another sidelong glance. "You might do, at that." As the miles passed, Clara found herself stealing glances at the man beside her. His hands on the reins were sure and steady. His posture relaxed despite his harsh words. There was a competence about him, a quiet strength that she found oddly reassuring. This was a man who knew how to survive in this unforgiving land. "Why?" The question escaped before Clara could stop it. "Why what?" "Why advertise for a bride? Surely there are women here who—" "The kind of women who come to frontier towns aren't usually the marrying kind," Jacob cut her off. "And the decent ones get snapped up quick or have better sense than to marry a widower with more debts than prospects." Widower. The word hung between them like dust in the air. Clara wanted to ask about his first wife, but sensed this wasn't the time. Instead, she said, "I'm sorry for your loss." Jacob's knuckles whitened on the reins. It was 3 years ago. The ranch, when it finally came into view, was exactly what Clara had steeled herself to expect. A modest wooden house with a wraparound porch sat in a cluster of outbuildings. A barn, a smokehouse, what looked like a bunkhouse for hired hands. Everything was functional, weathered by the elements but well maintained. A few chickens pecked in the dust yard, and she could see cattle dotting the distant rangeland. "Home, sweet home," Jacob said without inflection, as he helped her down from the wagon. Clara felt the full weight of her decision settling upon her shoulders. This was it. No turning back now. She was 1,000 miles from everything she'd ever known, about to marry a stranger who seemed carved from the very stone of the surrounding mesas. "I'll show you to your room," Jacob said, grabbing her bag. "You'll want to rest before supper." Clara followed him into the house, noting the sparse furnishings, the layer of dust on every surface, the masculine emptiness of the space. It needed a woman's touch desperately, but she kept that observation to herself. The room he led her to was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a single window overlooking the desert. Clara noticed another room across the hall, the door firmly closed. "That was Mary's room," Jacob said quietly, following her gaze. "My wife. It stays closed." "Of course." He set her bag on the bed and turned to go, then paused in the doorway. For a moment, his stern facade cracked, revealing something vulnerable underneath. "I know this isn't what you dreamed of when you were a little girl," he said. "A fine lady from Boston probably imagined something different than a broken-down ranch and a broken-down rancher. But I'll keep my end of the bargain if you keep yours. You'll have a home here, food on the table, and my protection. I can't promise more than that." Clara lifted her chin, finding strength in his honesty. "I'm not a fine lady, Mr. Carter. I'm the daughter of a failed merchant who tried to sell me to settle his debts. I came here of my own free will because even a broken-down ranch with an honest man is better than what waited for me in Boston." Something shifted in Jacob's expression. Surprise, perhaps, or respect. "We'll be married on Sunday. Reverend Mills comes through once a month, and he's due in 3 days. That'll give you time to settle in." As his footsteps faded down the hall, Clara sank onto the bed and finally allowed the tears she'd been holding back to fall. They came in great, gulping sobs that shook her whole body. Tears for her mother, for her lost life, for the uncertainty that lay ahead. The dust from her journey mixed with the salt on her cheeks, creating muddy tracks down her face. But even as she wept, Clara remembered the words Jacob had spoken, the unintentional promise in his gruff kindness. "You'll have a home here. Not just a house, but a home. And perhaps, in time, something more." Outside her window, the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, its lonesome cry echoing across the vast emptiness. Clara dried her tears with her mother's handkerchief and began to unpack her few belongings. She had arrived in dust and tears, but she would not remain that way. This land might be harsh, this man might be hard, but Clara Matthews had not come all this way to fail. She would learn to shoot a rifle. She would learn to be a rancher's wife. She would make this house a home. And maybe, just maybe, she would find something she hadn't even dared to hope for when she'd answered that advertisement in the Boston newspaper. Something that had nothing to do with bargains or obligations, but everything to do with the way Jacob Carter had looked at her in that unguarded moment, like a man who had forgotten what it meant to hope and was just beginning to remember. The rooster's crow pierced the pre-dawn darkness, jolting Clara from restless sleep. For a moment, she forgot where she was, reaching for the familiar comfort of her Boston bedroom. Instead, her fingers met rough wooden walls, and the reality of her new life crashed over her like cold water. Her first full day as a soon-to-be rancher's wife had begun. Clara dressed quickly in her simplest day dress, a faded brown calico that had seemed too plain for Boston, but now appeared almost frivolous for ranch work. She pulled her hair into a practical bun and made her way to the kitchen, determined to prove her worth. The kitchen was a disaster. Dirty dishes piled in the dry sink, the stove covered in grease, and what might have been last week's bread growing mold on the counter. Clara rolled up her sleeves and set to work, pumping water from the well outside, heating it on the stove, and attacking the mess with determined vigor. She was elbow deep in suds when Jacob appeared in the doorway, looking surprised to find her there. "You're up early?" he observed, pouring himself coffee from the pot she'd managed to clean and brew. "A household doesn't run itself. Mr. Carter." Clara wiped a strand of hair from her forehead with the back of her wrist. "When do the hands expect breakfast?" "The hands cook for themselves in the bunkhouse. It's just me." He paused, seeming uncomfortable. "You don't need to—" "What would you normally eat?" Clara interrupted, already searching through the meager supplies in the pantry. "Coffee, maybe some jerky." Clara turned to stare at him. "That's not a proper breakfast for a working man." "Been doing fine on it for 3 years." "Well, things are changing." Clara found eggs in a basket, some salt pork, and flour that wasn't too weevily. "Sit. Breakfast will be ready shortly." Jacob looked like he might argue, then shrugged and took a seat at the scarred wooden table. Clara could feel him watching as she worked, mixing biscuit dough with practiced efficiency despite the unfamiliar kitchen. "You weren't lying about knowing how to cook," he said when she set a plate of eggs, fried pork, and fresh biscuits before him. "I never lie. Mr. Carter." Clara poured herself coffee and sat across from him. "Though I'll need supplies from town. The pantry is nearly bare." "Make a list. I'll send one of the boys." Jacob ate with focused attention, and Clara felt a small glow of satisfaction when he reached for a second biscuit. After breakfast, Jacob stood and grabbed his hat. "Got work to do. You'll find washing that needs doing. Mending, too. Mary's sewing basket is in the parlor." Clara bit back the observation that 3 years of unwashed clothes might be beyond saving. Of course. When should I expect you for dinner? Sundown. Thereabouts. He paused at the door. Don't go wandering. Stay close to the house. The morning flew by in a whirlwind of activity. Clara attacked the house like a general planning a campaign. Room by room, surface by surface. The washing alone took hours, hauling water, heating it, scrubbing clothes that looked like they hadn't seen soap in months, wringing them out until her arms ached. As she hung clothes on the line, the desert sun already brutal despite the early hour. Clara became aware of eyes watching her. 3 cowboys leaned against the corral fence, grinning and nudging each other. "Well, look what the boss brought home," one called out. He was young, maybe 20, with sandy hair and an insolent smile. Pretty little thing, ain't she? Clara kept her eyes on her work, jaw set. "Hey there, Boston." Another chimed in. "Bet you never had to wash your own drawers back east." Heat flooded Clara's cheeks, but she refused to acknowledge them. She finished hanging the last shirt and gathered her basket. Head high. "Aw, don't be like that," the first one said. "We're just being friendly. Name's Pete. That there's Hank and Joe. We're real glad the boss finally got himself a woman. Been too long since we had something nice to look at around here." "I am not here for your entertainment," Clara said quietly but firmly. "Good day, gentlemen." Their laughter followed her into the house, making her hands shake as she closed the door. She leaned against it, heart racing, wondering what she'd gotten herself into. These men clearly had no respect for her, seeing her as nothing more than a mail-ordered novelty. The afternoon brought new challenges. Clara attempted to milk the cow, only to be kicked for her efforts. The chicken coop was a maze of aggressive hens who seemed personally offended by her presence. When she tried to gather eggs, one particularly vindictive bird pecked her hand hard enough to draw blood. "Need help there? Boston." Clara spun to find a different man watching her, older than the others, with kind eyes and graying temples. Unlike the cowboys from that morning, his expression held no mockery. "I can manage," Clara said, though her bleeding hand suggested otherwise. "No shame in needing help. Name's Tom Bradley. I'm the foreman here." He entered the coop with easy confidence, the hens parting before him like he was Moses at the Red Sea. Trick is to move slow and steady. They can smell fear. "I'm not afraid of chickens," Clara protested. Tom's mustache twitched with suppressed amusement. "Course not, but maybe you could be a mite more respectful of them. Here." He demonstrated the proper technique, and soon Clara had a basket full of eggs. "Thank you, Mr. Bradley." "Just Tom is fine. And ma'am, don't let the boys rile you. They're good hands, just a little rough around the edges. They'll settle once they realize you're staying." "If I stay," Clara thought but didn't say. As the sun reached its zenith, the heat became oppressive. Clara had never experienced anything like it, a dry, baking heat that seemed to suck the moisture from her very bones. Her dress was soaked with perspiration, her hair escaping its pins in damp tendrils. She pumped water and drank deeply, then splashed some on her face and neck. The house, at least, was taking shape. The kitchen gleamed, the parlor was dusted and aired, and she'd even braved Jacob's bedroom to change the sheets that probably hadn't been washed since his wife died. She'd paused at the closed door across the hall, Mary's room, but respected Jacob's wishes and left it untouched. As afternoon waned toward evening, Clara faced her next challenge preparing dinner. The stove was a cantankerous beast, nothing like the modern range she'd used in Boston. It took 3 attempts to get the temperature right, and she burned her arm on the hot metal door. She was wrestling with a pot of stew when she heard horses approaching. Through the window, she saw Jacob riding in with several other men. Her stomach knotted. Would he expect her to feed them all? But the other riders peeled off toward the bunkhouse, leaving only Jacob to stable his horse and approach the house. Clara quickly checked her appearance in the small mirror by the door, tucking away loose hair and smoothing her apron. She looked a fright. She knew, but there was nothing to be done about it. Jacob entered, hanging his hat on the peg by the door. His eyes swept the clean kitchen, the pot bubbling on the stove, the table set with the mismatched dishes she'd found. "You've been busy," he said neutrally. "I hope stew is acceptable. The supplies were limited." He washed at the basin she'd set out, then took his seat. Clara served him, then herself, waiting anxiously as he took the first bite. "It's good," he said, and seemed surprised by the fact. They ate in silence for a while, the only sound the clink of spoons against bowls. Finally, Clara couldn't stand it anymore. "Some of your men were forward with me today." Jacob's spoon paused halfway to his mouth. "Which ones?" "It doesn't matter. I handled it." "It does matter. You're to be my wife. They'll respect you or find work elsewhere. Please don't make trouble on my account. I'm sure they meant no real harm." Jacob set down his spoon and looked at her directly. "This isn't Boston. Miss Matthews, out here. Respect is earned and boundaries are maintained. If the men think they can treat you poorly without consequences, it'll only get worse. Then perhaps the problem is that I haven't earned their respect yet." "The problem," Jacob said firmly, "is that they're testing boundaries. I'll speak to them." Clara wanted to protest further but recognized the set of his jaw. This was his world, his rules. She changed the subject. "Tom Bradley helped me with the chickens today. He was very kind. Tom's a good man. Been with me since I started this place." Jacob resumed eating. He knew Mary. The name hung between them again, the ghost that haunted every corner of this house. "She must have been a wonderful woman," Clara ventured carefully. "She was—" Jacob's voice was flat, closed. "She knew this life. Grew up on a ranch in Texas, never complained, never asked for things I couldn't give." The unspoken comparison stung. Clara, the soft city woman who couldn't even gather eggs without help. "I'm trying to learn, Mr. Carter." "I know," he sighed, suddenly looking older than his years. "I'm not being fair. You've done more in one day than I've managed in months. The place looks better." It was faint praise, but Clara clung to it. "I'll do better tomorrow." "You did fine today." Jacob pushed back from the table. "I've got account books to review. Don't wait up." Clara cleared the dishes, washed them, and set the kitchen to rights for morning. Her body ached in places she didn't know could ache. Her hands were red and raw from the lye soap. Her back screamed from bending over the wash tub, and the burn on her arm throbbed with each heartbeat. She made her way to her room on leaden feet, not bothering to light a lamp. In the darkness, she sat on the edge of her bed and finally allowed the tears to come. Silent tears this time, born of exhaustion and homesickness and the crushing realization of how unprepared she was for this life. Through her window, she could hear the cowboys in the bunkhouse, their laughter and crude jokes carrying on the still air. Further out, coyotes yipped and howled, their cries echoing off the distant mesas. And somewhere in this house, Jacob Carter sat with his ledgers, as alone as she was despite being under the same roof. Clara pulled her mother's Bible from her trunk, running her fingers over the worn leather cover. She'd promised herself she'd be strong, that she'd make this work. But strength, she was learning, wasn't just about determination. It was about adapting, learning, swallowing pride when necessary. Tomorrow, she decided, she would ask Tom to teach her more about the animals. She would learn to work the cantankerous stove without burning herself. She would find ways to stretch their meager supplies into better meals. And somehow, she would find a way to reach the lonely, grieving man she was to marry in 3 days' time. Because for all the hardships, for all the crude cowboys and aggressive chickens and back-breaking labor, Clara had noticed something today. The way Jacob's eyes had softened when he saw the clean kitchen, the surprise in his voice when he said the stew was good, the protective anger when she mentioned the cowboy's behavior. There was a good man under that hard exterior, a man worth knowing. Clara just had to survive long enough to find him. As she changed into her nightgown, wincing at muscles already stiffening. Clara made a decision. She would not be the fragile Boston flower they all expected. She would become what this land and this life demanded. Strong, capable, enduring. The rancher might have paid for a bride, but what he would get was a partner, whether he wanted one or not. Sunday morning dawned clear and merciless, the kind of day that promised heat before the dew could even dry. Clara stood before the cracked mirror in her room, pinning her mother's wedding veil to her carefully arranged hair. The delicate lace looked absurdly out of place in this rough-hewn room, like a butterfly that had somehow wandered into a scorpion's den. 3 days. She'd been here only 3 days, yet it felt like a lifetime since she'd stepped off that train. Her hands bore new calluses. Her arms showed bruises from wrestling with the washboard. And despite her best efforts, the desert sun had already begun to pink her pale Boston complexion. A knock at her door made her jump. "Miss Matthews, Reverend Mills has arrived." Jacob's voice, formal and distant. They'd barely spoken since that first dinner, passing like strangers in the house despite sharing meals. He'd kept his word about speaking to the cowboys. They now tipped their hats respectfully when she passed, but the damage to her reputation was already done. "I'll be right there, Mr. Carter." Clara took one last look in the mirror, straightened her spine, and opened the door. Jacob stood in the hallway wearing what must have been his best clothes, a black suit that had seen better days, freshly brushed but shiny at the elbows. His face was clean-shaven, revealing a strong jaw she hadn't noticed beneath the stubble. His eyes traveled over her appearance, lingering on the veil. Something flickered across his face. Pain, perhaps, or memory. "That was Mary's," he said quietly. "The veil." Clara's hand flew to her head. "Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I'll take it off." "No." His voice was gruff. She would have liked that. Someone using it again." An awkward silence stretched between them until Jacob cleared his throat and offered his arm. "Shall we?" The small church was already fuller than Clara had expected. News of the mail-order bride had clearly spread through the territory, drawing curious ranchers and their families from miles around. Clara felt their eyes on her as she walked down the aisle on Jacob's arm. Some curious, some pitying, others openly disapproving. "Mail-order bride," she heard someone whisper. "Bought and paid for like a prize heifer." "Shameful," another voice agreed. "What kind of woman sells herself like that?" Clara's cheeks burned, but she kept her head high, focusing on the rough wooden cross at the front of the church. Reverend Mills waited there, a thin man with kind eyes who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. The ceremony was brief and businesslike. Clara barely heard the words, too aware of the congregation's judgment pressing against her back like a physical weight. When it came time for the ring, Jacob produced a simple gold band, not new, she realized with a start. Mary's ring, probably. He slid it onto her finger with hands that trembled slightly. "You may kiss your bride." Reverend Mills intoned. Jacob leaned down, and for a moment Clara thought he might actually kiss her properly. Instead, his lips barely brushed her cheek, a gesture so perfunctory it might have been between strangers, which, she supposed, they were. "Welcome to Coyote Springs, Mrs. Carter," a woman's voice said as they turned to face the congregation. The speaker was middle-aged, with a pinched face and elaborate hat that must have cost more than Clara's entire trousseau. "I'm Mrs. Abigail Morrison. My husband owns the bank." "Pleased to meet you," Clara managed. "I'm sure you are." Mrs. Morrison's smile was sharp as broken glass. "It must be quite a relief to have secured a position, given your circumstances." "My circumstances?" "Well, a woman who advertises herself in newspapers can hardly be particular. Can she? Though I suppose Jacob couldn't be either, considering." Her eyes glittered with malicious pleasure. "Still, We must make the best of things, mustn't we, even if some of us start lower than others? The words hit like a slap. Clara felt Jacob tense beside her, but before either could respond, another voice intervened. "Abigail Morrison, you nasty old crow! Leave the poor girl alone!" The speaker was an elderly woman in a patched but clean dress, her face weathered but kind. She shouldered Mrs. Morrison aside with surprising strength. "I'm Dolores McGinnis," she told Clara warmly. "I delivered half the babies in this territory, including that harpy's 3 brats. Don't you pay her no mind. Dear, jealousy's an ugly thing, and Abigail's been wearing it for years." "How dare you, Mrs.?" Morrison sputtered. "Oh, hush. We all know you had your cap set for Jacob after poor Mary passed. Must sting something fierce to see him with a pretty young thing instead." Mrs. McGinnis took Clara's arm. "Come, dear, let me introduce you to the decent folks." The next hour was a blur of faces and names. Some were welcoming, others coolly polite, and a few openly hostile. Clara smiled until her cheeks ached, answered the same questions over and over. Yes, she was from Boston. No, she'd never been on a ranch before. Yes, it was quite different from the city. Through it all, she was painfully aware of the whispers that followed in her wake. Bought bride. Desperate woman. Poor Jacob, settling for catalog goods. The reception, held in the churchyard, was a modest affair. Clara had baked what she could with their limited supplies, and other women had brought dishes to share. She noticed how they watched her, evaluating her dress, her manners, her every move. "You're doing fine," Tom Bradley murmured, appearing at her elbow with a cup of lemonade. "Don't let them rattle you." "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone who's watching." He gave her a paternal smile. "They're testing you, just like the boys at the ranch. Show weakness, and they'll eat you alive. Stand firm, and eventually they'll accept you. And if they don't, then that's their loss, not yours." Clara was about to thank him when a commotion near the punch bowl caught her attention. A man she hadn't met was speaking loudly, gesturing with a cup that sloshed dangerously. Supposed to respect a woman who sells herself through the mail, what's next? Ordering brides from a catalog like they're boots or bridles. "Samuel, that's enough." Jacob's voice cut through the chatter like a blade. Samuel turned, and Clara saw the family resemblance immediately. Same gray eyes, same strong jaw, but where Jacob's face was weathered by responsibility, Samuel's held the softer look of a man who'd avoided hard work. "Brother," Samuel spread his arms wide, sloshing more punch. "Congratulations on your purchase. How much did she set you back more or less than a good broodmare?" The crowd gasped. Clara felt the blood drain from her face, then rush back in a hot wave of humiliation. Jacob stepped forward, fists clenched, but Clara caught his arm. "Please," she whispered, "don't make a scene." "Listen to your wife, Jake." Samuel sneered. "Oh, wait, can I call her that? Or is she more of an employee, hard to tell with these business arrangements?" "You're drunk," Jacob said flatly. "Go home, Samuel." "Drunk on truth. Maybe. Come on, Jake. We all know why you did this. Couldn't get a real woman to marry you. Not after Mary, had to buy one instead." Clara couldn't stand it anymore. The humiliation, the cruel words, the judgment of the entire town pressing down on her like stones. Without thinking, she stepped forward. "You're right," she said clearly, her Boston accent sharp in the desert air. "I am a mail-order bride. I answered an advertisement, traveled across the country, and married a man I'd never met. And do you know what that makes me?" The crowd held its breath. "Brave," Clara continued, lifting her chin. "It makes me brave. While you've been here drowning your failures in whiskey and bitterness, I left everything I knew for a chance at something better. That's more courage than you've shown in your entire life. Mr. Carter." Samuel's face flushed dark red. You little... Furthermore, Clara cut him off. Your brother is a good man who works hard and deserves respect. The fact that you can't see that says far more about you than it does about either of us. She turned to the stunned crowd. Yes, I'm a mail-order bride. Yes, Jacob paid for my passage here. But I am not bought or sold. I am here by choice, and I will make a life here by choice. If that offends your delicate sensibilities, then perhaps you should examine why you find a woman's independence so threatening. The silence was deafening. Then Mrs. McGinnis began to clap, slowly and deliberately. Tom Bradley joined her, then a few others. Not everyone. Mrs. Morrison looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. But enough. Samuel stormed off, but not before shooting Clara a look of pure venom. Jacob stood frozen beside her, his expression unreadable. Well, Reverend Mills said weakly, perhaps we should cut the cake. The rest of the reception passed in a blur. Some people approached Clara with new respect. Others maintained their cold distance. But something had shifted. She was no longer just the mail-order bride. She was the woman who'd stood up to Samuel Carter. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, Jacob helped Clara into the wagon for the ride home. They traveled in silence for a long while, the events of the day settling between them like dust. That was... Jacob began, then stopped. Inappropriate, unladylike, embarrassing. Brave. He finished quietly. Probably foolish. Definitely brave. Clara looked at him in surprise. His profile was stern as always, but there was something different in the set of his shoulders. Samuel's my younger brother, he said suddenly. Always has been wild. Irresponsible. After our parents died, I tried to... Well, doesn't matter. He is what he is. He hurt you, Clara observed. With what he said about Mary. Jacob's hands tightened on the reins. Mary understood him. Said he was just lost. Needed understanding. Even after he cut himself off. After what? Nothing. It's done. They rode in silence again. But it was a different kind of silence. Not the awkward distance of strangers, but something more companionable. As they pulled up to the house, Jacob helped her down from the wagon. His hands lingered on her waist for just a moment. You did good today, Clara. It was the first time he'd used her given name. Clara felt warmth bloom in her chest, more precious than any compliment. Thank you, Jacob. He started to turn away, then paused. That veil, it looked right on you. Mary would have been pleased. As he led the horses to the barn, Clara touched the lace at her head. She'd forgotten she was still wearing it. Carefully, she unpinned it and folded it with reverent hands. Tomorrow, she would pack it away safely. It was too precious for everyday wear, this gossamer connection to the woman who'd come before. Inside the house, Clara looked around with new eyes. This was her home now, truly and legally. Not because Jacob had paid for her passage, but because she'd claimed it. Because she'd stood in front of the town and declared her choice. She was still a mail-order bride. That fact wouldn't change, and the whispers wouldn't stop overnight. But maybe Tom Bradley was right. Maybe acceptance wasn't about changing who she was, but about standing firm in it. Clara removed her wedding dress carefully, hanging it in the wardrobe next to her few other garments. Tomorrow, she would return to her calico and aprons, to the endless work of making this house a home. But tonight, she had earned something precious, not just a new name or a ring on her finger, but a tiny seed of respect. It wasn't love. Not yet, but it was a beginning. Outside her window, a coyote called to the rising moon, its cry echoing across the empty lands. But tonight, it didn't sound quite so lonely. Tonight, Clara Matthews Carter had found her voice in the desert, and she intended to use it. The sandstorm announced itself with a wall of brown death on the horizon, rolling across the desert like God's own fury. Clara had been hanging wash when Tom Bradley came riding hard from the north pasture. His horse lathered with sweat and fear. "Storm coming," he shouted. "Big one, where's Jacob?" "He rode out to check the eastern herd this morning," Clara called back, already pulling sheets from the line. The wind was picking up, making the fabric snap like whips. Tom cursed. "Get inside. Mrs. Carter, lock everything down. I'll ride out after him." "No," Clara grabbed his stirrup. "You'll get lost in that." She pointed to the advancing wall of sand, now close enough to blot out half the sky. "He knows to find shelter." But even as she said it, worry gnawed at her stomach. Jacob had been distant since their wedding 2 weeks ago, cordial but careful, as if her defiance of Samuel had somehow changed things between them. He spent longer hours in the saddle, coming home after dark, too tired for anything but basic conversation. "Help me with the animals." Clara decided, "We can't leave them exposed." Together, they raced against time. The chickens were herded into their coop and locked tight. The milk cow bellowed in protest as they forced her into the barn. The horses in the corral, sensing danger, had become skittish and wild-eyed. "Leave them," Tom shouted over the rising wind. "They'll find their own shelter." But Clara saw Buttercup, the gentle mare she'd been learning to ride, cornered against the fence by the panicking herd. Without thinking, she grabbed a rope from the fence post and waded into the chaos. "I'm Mrs. Carter." "No." The horses were a swirling mass of muscle and terror. Clara ducked under a swinging neck, dodged sideways as hooves struck where she'd been standing. Dust was already thickening the air, turning day into twilight. She reached Buttercup, managed to get the rope around her neck, and began pulling her toward the barn. That's when she saw him, Jacob, riding hard from the east, racing the storm. His hat was gone, his horse running flat out. Behind him, the sandstorm towered like a biblical plague, eating the earth as it came. "The cattle!" he yelled as he thundered into the yard. "They scattered half the herd." The rest was lost as the storm hit with the force of a freight train. Clara felt herself lifted off her feet, still clinging to Buttercup's rope. Sand scoured every inch of exposed skin, filled her mouth and nose, blinded her completely. She couldn't breathe, couldn't see, couldn't think beyond the need to survive. Strong arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her against a solid chest. Jacob. He half carried, half dragged her and the horse toward what she hoped was the barn. The world had become a howling brown nightmare, directionless and suffocating. They crashed through the barn door just as Clara thought her lungs would burst. Tom slammed it shut behind them, throwing the heavy bar across. The building shook like it might tear apart at the seams, but it held. Clara collapsed to her knees, coughing and gasping. Sand poured from her hair, her clothes, seeming to come from her very pores. Beside her, Jacob was in similar condition, his face a mask of dirt broken only by the tracks of sweat. "You damn fool woman!" he exploded, anger born of fear making his voice crack. "You could have been killed." "The horse," Clara wheezed. "To hell with the horse. You don't risk your life for an animal. You risk yours for cattle every day." "That's different." "Why? Because you're a man." They glared at each other through sand-crusted eyes, both breathing hard. The barn shook again as the storm intensified, and somewhere in the rafters, something crashed. "The roof won't hold," Tom said grimly. "We need to get to the house." "Can't," Jacob said. "Not in this. We'd be blind 2 steps out the door." Clara struggled to her feet, still clutching Buttercup's rope. The mare was trembling, eyes rolling white with terror. Without thinking, Clara began to stroke her neck, humming tunelessly, a lullaby her mother used to sing. Gradually, the horse calmed. "Where'd you learn that?" Jacob asked, his anger fading to something like curiosity. I just did what felt right." He studied her for a long moment, this proper Boston lady covered in dirt and straw, gentling a terrified horse in the middle of a sandstorm. Something shifted in his expression. "Come here," he said quietly. Clara moved closer, and Jacob pulled her against him, wrapping his duster around them both. She stiffened at first. They'd barely touched since their wedding day, but as another violent gust shook the barn, she relaxed into his warmth. "I'm sorry," he murmured into her hair. "For yelling. When I saw you in with those horses—" "I couldn't leave her," Clara whispered back. "She was so frightened." His arms tightened. "You're shaking." She was, Clara realized. Now that the immediate danger had passed, reaction was setting in. The storm outside seemed to go on forever, a roaring beast trying to devour their small shelter. Dust sifted through every crack and crevice, coating them in fresh layers of grit. "Tell me about Boston," Jacob said suddenly. Clara pulled back to look at him. "What?" "Talk to me about Boston, the storm. It helps to focus on something else." So Clara talked. She told him about the common in spring, when the swan boats glided across the pond, about the gaslights on winter evenings, making the snow sparkle like diamonds, about her mother's garden, small but cherished, where roses climbed an old trellis. "Ma would sit there in the evenings," Clara said, her voice soft with memory. "Reading poetry aloud while I did my needlework. Browning was her favorite. God's in his heaven, all's right with the world." "Doesn't feel much like God's in his heaven right now," Tom observed from where he sat with his back against a post. But Jacob was looking at Clara with an odd expression. Mary loved poetry too. Had a whole book of it. Used to read in the evenings. It was the most he'd voluntarily said about his first wife. Clara waited, not pushing. "She was out checking on a sick calf when a storm like this hit," he continued, voice rough. "Smaller than this one. We thought, but she got turned around, lost, by the time we found her." He stopped, swallowed hard. "The desert doesn't forgive mistakes." Clara's hand found his, sandy fingers intertwining. "I'm sorry. I swore I'd never let myself." He seemed to struggle for words. "When I wrote that advertisement, I told myself I just needed help with the ranch, someone practical. I wasn't looking for—" The barn door exploded inward. The three of them scrambled back as wind and sand howled through the opening. Part of the roof peeled away like paper, and suddenly they were exposed to the full fury of the storm. "The house!" Tom bellowed. "Now!" Jacob grabbed Clara's hand and they ran, blind, into the maelstrom. She couldn't see, couldn't breathe, could only trust in his grip and the vague sense of direction. They slammed into something solid, the porch railing, and groped their way to the door. Inside, they collapsed in a heap, Tom kicking the door shut and throwing his weight against it. The house groaned and protested but held firm, built to withstand such assaults. "The barn's gone," Tom panted. "Saw it coming apart as we ran." Jacob was already moving, checking windows, looking for weaknesses. Clara forced herself up, joining him. Together they shoved furniture against rattling panes, stuffed rags under doors, did what they could to seal out the storm. When there was nothing more to be done, they huddled in the kitchen, the most protected room. Clara made coffee with shaking hands, the familiar ritual grounding in its normalcy. Outside, the world seemed to be ending, but here she could still measure grounds, still pour water, still serve cups to tired men. "You did good," Jacob said quietly, taking his cup. "With the animals, with everything." Before Clara could respond, he leaned forward and kissed her. Not the perfunctory brush of lips from their wedding, but something real and urgent and alive. His hands cupped her face, thumbs tracing her cheekbones, and Clara found herself kissing him back with a fervor that surprised them both. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. Jacob started, then stopped, looking almost bewildered. "Clara, Another piece of the roof tore away somewhere above them, and they all ducked instinctively. But Clara caught his hand, held it tight. "I know," she said simply. And she did. In that kiss. She'd felt everything he couldn't say, the fear of losing again, the guilt of moving on, the unexpected hope that maybe, just maybe, happiness wasn't behind him after all. The storm raged for 3 more hours. They spent it close together, not talking much, finding comfort in proximity, when exhaustion finally claimed her. Clara dozed against Jacob's shoulder, his arm strong around her. She woke to silence and sunlight streaming through cracks in the boarded windows. The world outside was transformed, drifts of sand like snow against buildings, the landscape rearranged by wind. The barn was indeed gone, reduced to scattered timber. Dead cattle dotted the visible range. "It's bad," Tom said unnecessarily. Jacob's face was grim as he surveyed the damage. This could ruin them. Clara knew. The lost cattle, the destroyed barn, the scattered herd, it would take everything they had to recover. "We'll rebuild," she said firmly. Both men looked at her. "We'll rebuild," Clara repeated. "The barn, the herd, everything. It's what people do out here, isn't it? When the desert knocks you down, you get back up." A slow smile spread across Jacob's weathered face. "Yes," he said, "it is." He pulled her close again, there in the doorway of their battered but standing home, and kissed her once more. This time it was softer, a promise rather than a desperate claim. "Welcome to the desert, Mrs. Carter," he murmured against her lips. "Think you'll stay?" Clara looked out at the storm-scrubbed landscape, harsh and unforgiving, but somehow beautiful in its raw honesty. Then she looked up at her husband, really her husband now, not just in law but in truth. "Try and stop me," she said, and meant it. The rancher's kiss had promised a home for her heart, and in the aftermath of nature's fury, that promise had finally begun to bloom into something real, something worth fighting for, something worth staying for. The desert had tested her with wind and sand and terror, but Clara Matthews Carter had proven herself to be more than a mail-order bride, more than a Boston lady playing at frontier life. She was home. The first sign of trouble came 3 weeks after the sandstorm, when Pete discovered the cut fence wires on the north pasture. Jacob stood over the damaged fence, his face dark with worry as he examined the clean cuts. "This ain't no accident," Tom Bradley said, spitting tobacco juice into the dust. "Someone wanted those cattle moving." "How many are missing?" Clara asked. She'd ridden out with them, having become proficient enough on Buttercup to help with the daily ranch work. "Near 50 head, Jacob replied grimly. "At current prices, that's enough to finish us." They'd been struggling to recover from the storm damage. Every penny counted and calculated. The loss of 50 cattle might as well have been 500. "The Kruger gang's been hitting ranches down south," Pete offered. "Heard tell they were moving north." "We don't know it's the Kruger gang," Jacob said, but his hand moved unconsciously to the gun at his hip. That evening, as Clara served supper, she noticed Samuel hadn't come by in days. Jacob's brother usually appeared at least twice a week, always at mealtimes, always with empty pockets and a smooth excuse. His absence felt ominous. "Have you seen Samuel lately?" she asked carefully. Jacob's jaw tightened. "No, and that's fine by me." "He's your brother." "He's a disappointment." Jacob pushed his plate away. "Always has been, always will be." Later, as Clara cleaned up, she heard horses approaching. Multiple horses, riding fast. Jacob was already reaching for his rifle when Tom Bradley burst through the door. "Riders coming from the east, 6, maybe 7. "Clara, get upstairs," Jacob ordered. "I can help." "Upstairs, now." The sharpness in his voice brooked no argument. Clara gathered her skirts and ran, but instead of hiding, she positioned herself at the bedroom window where she could see the yard. The riders materialized from the darkness like phantoms. Rough men, trail-worn and dangerous, led by a giant with a scarred face that showed clearly in the moonlight. Clara's blood ran cold. These weren't just cattle thieves. These were killers. "Evening. Carter." The leader called out. His voice carried the trace of a German accent. "Nice night for a talk." "Get off my land, Kruger!" Jacob stood on the porch, rifle ready but not aimed. Tom flanked him, similarly armed. "Now, is that any way to treat a business partner?" Kruger dismounted with surprising grace for such a large man. "Especially one who's been so helpful with your cattle problem." "I don't have a cattle problem." "No 50 head says different. Good price for them in Mexico. Course, could have been more. But your brother said we had to leave enough so you wouldn't go under complete." Clara's hand flew to her mouth. "Samuel, he'd betrayed them." "You're lying," Jacob said, but uncertainty colored his tone. "Am I?" Kruger smiled, revealing gold teeth. "Ask him yourself." From behind the group of riders, Samuel emerged, even from her window. Clara could see he was drunk, swaying slightly as he tried to focus on his brother. "Jake," he slurred. "Didn't mean for it to go this far, just needed some money, you understand, just a few cattle." "You sold us out." Jacob's voice was deadly quiet. "Your own family." "Family?" Samuel laughed bitterly. "You haven't been family since Mary died, since you blamed me." "Because it was your fault," Jacob exploded. "You were supposed to watch for storms that day. You were drunk in town instead." Clara gasped. So that was the secret. The thing that lay between the brothers like poison. "I loved her too," Samuel said, tears now streaming down his face. "She was kind to me when no one else was. You think I don't carry that guilt every day?" "Touching," Kruger interrupted. "But we have business. Your brother owes us money. Carter, gambling debts. We took the cattle as partial payment, but there's still the matter of interest." "How much?" "More than you have, unless..." Kruger's eyes swept the property. "This is good land, water rights, grazing territory, worth quite a bit to the right buyer. You're not getting my land. Then maybe we take something else." Kruger's gaze lifted to the house, and Clara shrank back from the window. "Heard you got yourself a new wife. Pretty thing from back east. She might fetch a good price in certain establishments." The rifle shot split the night. Kruger's hat flew off. A neat hole punched through the crown. "The next one goes through your head," Jacob said calmly. "Touch my wife, threaten my wife. Hell, look at my wife wrong, and I'll kill every last one of you." The courtyard bristled with drawn weapons. Clara's heart pounded as she watched the standoff, knowing that if shooting started, Jacob and Tom were vastly outnumbered. "I can fix this," Samuel said desperately. "I know where they're keeping the cattle. I can get them back." "Shut up, boy," Kruger snarled. "You've outlived your usefulness." Clara saw the outlaw's hand move toward his gun and acted without thinking. The heavy water pitcher on the dresser fit her hand perfectly. She flung it through the window with all her strength, catching one of Kruger's men in the head. He toppled from his horse, causing chaos as the animal reared. In the confusion, she grabbed Jacob's hunting rifle from beside the wardrobe. He'd taught her to shoot after the storm, insisting she'd learn to defend herself. The weapon was heavy but familiar now in her hands. "Nobody move," she shouted through the broken window. "I've got a clear shot at you, Mr. Kruger, and unlike my husband, I haven't had time to develop any qualms about killing." It was a bluff. Clara's hands shook so badly she could barely hold the rifle steady, but Kruger didn't know that. "Interesting woman you've got there. Carter," he said, actually sounding amused. "Maybe we can work something out after all." "The only thing we're working out is your departure," Jacob replied. "Take your men and go. Leave my brother." "Can't do that. Boy knows too much." "Then I'm going with them," Samuel said suddenly. "It's the only way. Jake, you know it. I can't face what I've done. Not again." The brothers stared at each other across the moonlit yard. Years of pain, anger, and loss hung between them. but also the faint memory of what they'd once been to each other. "Mary forgave you," Jacob said finally, his voice thick. "The day before she died, she told me to forgive you, said holding on to anger would poison me." He lowered his rifle slightly. "I never told you that. I should have." Samuel's face crumpled. "Jake, Go," Jacob said. "Go and don't come back. If I see you again, brother or not, I'll turn you over to the law." Kruger laughed. "Family, more trouble than they're worth. Mount up, boys. We've wasted enough time here." "What about the money?" one of his men protested. "Consider it a loss. Something tells me the Carters aren't worth the bullets it would take to collect." He tipped his damaged hat mockingly at the window where Clara stood. "Ma'am, you've got sand. I'll give you that." As quickly as they'd come, the outlaws melted back into the night, taking Samuel with them. Clara watched until the dust settled, then sagged against the window frame, the rifle sliding from nerveless fingers. She heard Jacob's boots on the stairs. Then he was there, pulling her into his arms. "Are you insane?" he demanded, voice shaking. "Throwing things at armed outlaws, pointing guns at killers." "I couldn't let them hurt you," Clara said simply. He crushed her against him, burying his face in her hair. "God, Clara, when he threatened you, I've already lost one wife. I won't." "You won't," she promised, holding him just as tightly. "I'm not Mary. Jacob, I'm not going anywhere." They stood there for a long moment, clinging to each other while the adrenaline slowly faded. Finally, Jacob pulled back to examine her face. "You would have shot him. Kruger. I could see it in your stance." Clara met his gaze steadily. "If he'd drawn on you, yes." Something fierce and proud flashed in Jacob's eyes. "My Boston lady. Throwing pitchers and wielding rifles like some frontier Amazon." "I'm not a Boston lady anymore," Clara corrected. "I'm a rancher's wife, your wife." He kissed her then, deep and passionate, full of all the fear and relief and growing love between them. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. "We still lost the cattle," Clara said practically. "And Samuel made his choice. He's been making it for years." Jacob's voice held sorrow, but also acceptance. "As for the cattle, we'll survive. We've survived worse." Tom's voice carried up from below. "Boss, you folks all right up there?" "We're fine. Tom," Jacob called back. "Check the perimeter. Make sure they're really gone." As Tom's footsteps faded, Jacob touched Clara's face gently. "You know what this means, don't you? Word will spread about tonight. Every two-bit rustler and outlaw in the territory will know the Carter Ranch fought off the Kruger gang." "Will they come back?" "Maybe. Probably not. Kruger's smart. He knows when a mark isn't worth the trouble." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "But you've got a target on your back now. They know you're not just some helpless Eastern woman." "Good," Clara said firmly. "I want them to know. I want everyone to know that this is our land, our home, and we'll fight for it." Jacob smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. "Have I told you lately that you're remarkable?" "Not in the last few minutes." He laughed, a sound Clara was hearing more often these days. "Come on, remarkable woman. Let's go reassure Tom and figure out how to get our cattle back. Without Samuel to show us where they are. I've got a pretty good idea. Kruger's not as clever as he thinks." Jacob took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "But first, let me teach you how to properly bluff armed desperados. That shaking rifle wasn't fooling anyone who knew what to look for." As they headed downstairs together, Clara reflected on how much had changed since that first day at the depot. She'd arrived as a mail-order bride, uncertain and overwhelmed. Now she was a partner, a defender, a true frontier wife. The desert had tested her with storms. The town had tested her with scorn. Tonight, outlaws had tested her courage. Each trial had tempered her, like steel in a forge, until the Boston lady was gone entirely. In her place stood Clara Carter, crackshot almost, pitcher-throwing defender of hearth and home, and wife to a man she was beginning to love with a fierce, protective passion she hadn't known herself capable of. The cattle were gone. For now. Samuel was lost to them, probably forever. But as Jacob squeezed her hand, Clara knew they would weather this storm just as they'd weathered the sandstorm. Together! The full moon cast eerie shadows across the desert as Clara jolted awake to the sound of gunfire. Beside her, Jacob was already moving, reaching for his rifle in one smooth motion. "Stay down," he commanded. But Clara was already rolling out of bed, grabbing her own weapon. More shots split the night, followed by the thunder of hooves and men shouting. Through the window, Clara could see muzzle flashes from the direction of the corral. "They're after the horses," Jacob said grimly. Tom and the boys must have spotted them. They descended the stairs quickly, Clara still in her nightgown with only a shawl thrown over her shoulders. As they reached the kitchen, the door burst open. Pete stumbled in, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. "It's Kruger," he gasped. He came back with more men. "They've got Tom pinned down behind the water trough." Jacob cursed. "How many?" 8, maybe 10. "Boss, they're not here for the horses. Heard them saying they want the woman." Clara's blood ran cold, but she tightened her grip on the rifle. "Well, they can't have me." "Clara," Jacob started, but she cut him off. "No, I'm not hiding while you men fight. This is my home, too." Before he could argue, a new voice carried across the yard. "Carter, send out your pretty wife, and we'll leave peaceful-like. Otherwise, we'll burn you out." "Go to hell! Kruger!" Jacob shouted back. Such language in front of a lady. Kruger mocked. "Though from what I hear, she's got quite a mouth on her, too. Come on out, Mrs. Carter. Some gentlemen in Mexico are very eager to meet you." Clara felt sick, but anger burned hotter than fear. These men thought they could take her like she was property, like the old days when her father tried to sell her to pay his debts. "Pete, can you still shoot?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am." "Good. Cover the back door." She turned to Jacob. "They'll expect us to fort up in here, but this house is too vulnerable. We need to take the fight to them." "Clara, you're not—" "I am." She met his gaze steadily. "Partners. Remember?" Something shifted in Jacob's expression. Fear, yes, but also pride and trust. "All right. What did you have in mind?" "Create a crossfire. You go out the front, I'll slip out through the root cellar. It opens near the smokehouse. If I can get behind them..." "Too dangerous." "Everything's dangerous now." She touched his face briefly. "Trust me." He caught her hand, pressing it to his lips. "If anything happens to you..." "It won't." They moved quickly. Clara grabbed ammunition and made her way to the root cellar, the earthen tunnel they dug for storing vegetables. It was narrow and dark, but it opened 20 yards from the house, hidden by sagebrush. She emerged into chaos. The outlaws had spread out, taking cover behind overturned wagons and farm equipment. Muzzle flashes lit the night like deadly fireflies. She could see Tom behind the water trough, returning fire when he could. 2 of the ranch hands were with him, including young Billy Morrison, just 17 and scared out of his wits. Clara crept toward the smokehouse, using every shadow, every bit of cover. Her nightgown caught on thorns and rocks cut her bare feet, but she pressed on. From her new position, she had a clear view of 3 outlaws who were focused entirely on the house. She took a breath, steadied her rifle against the smokehouse wall, and fired. Her shot caught one man in the shoulder, spinning him around. Before the others could react, she fired again, forcing them to scramble for new cover. "It's the woman," someone shouted. "She's behind us." The battlefield shifted as outlaws turned to face this new threat. Clara kept firing, moving between shots, making them think there were more defenders than just her. Then she saw him, Samuel, crouched behind an overturned cart, Their eyes met across the distance, and she saw his face contort with anguish. "Watch out!" he screamed. Clara spun just as one of Kruger's men lunged at her from the shadows. His weight slammed into her, sending them both sprawling. The rifle flew from her hands. They rolled in the dirt. Clara fighting with every ounce of strength she possessed. Her fingers found his eyes and she gouged, making him howl and rear back. A gunshot cracked nearby. The outlaw's expression went slack and he toppled sideways. Samuel stood there, smoking pistol in hand, looking as surprised as Clara felt. "I couldn't," he said brokenly. "I couldn't let them take you." Before Clara could respond, Kruger's voice roared across the battlefield. "Traitor, kill them both!" Samuel hauled Clara to her feet and they ran, bullets whining past their ears. They dove behind a pile of lumber just as Jacob appeared from the house, laying down covering fire. "Samuel," Jacob's voice held a world of questions. "Later," Clara gasped. "If there is a later." The battle raged on. Clara had lost her rifle, but Samuel shared his pistol ammunition. Side by side with the brothers, she fought for her home, her life, her freedom. Tom and the ranch hands pressed from their position, creating the crossfire she'd envisioned. Then young Billy made a fatal error, eager to prove himself. He broke cover, trying to get a better shot. Clara saw it happening as if in slow motion. Billy stepping out, Kruger raising his rifle, the muzzle flash. "No!" She was moving before she thought, slamming into Billy, driving him back to safety. Pain exploded through her side as she fell, hot and sharp. "Clara!" Jacob's anguished cry cut through the gunfire. She pressed her hand to her side, felt the warm wetness spreading. Not fatal? She thought with odd clarity. The bullet had gouged along her ribs, painful but not deep. Still, blood loss could kill as surely as a direct hit. "I'm all right," she called, though her voice shook. "Keep fighting." But the tide had turned. Seeing Clara shot, Jacob became a man possessed. He advanced on the outlaw's position with deadly determination, every shot finding its mark. Tom and the hands pressed forward too, inspired by fury. And Samuel. Samuel stood over Clara, defending her with desperate courage, as if protecting her might somehow atone for all his failures. "Fall back!" Kruger shouted. "Fall back!" But as the outlaws tried to retreat, new gunfire erupted from the east. Riders poured into the yard, ranchers from neighboring spreads, led by none other than Mrs. McGinnis's husband. "Heard the shooting from our place," he called. "Thought you might need help." Caught between two forces, Kruger's gang crumbled. Some fled into the night, others threw down their weapons. Kruger himself, wounded and cornered, made one last desperate play. "Your brother dies first. Carter," he snarled, raising his gun toward Samuel. 3 shots rang out simultaneously. Jacob's, Clara's. She'd grabbed a fallen pistol, and Samuel's own weapon turning on the outlaw leader. Kruger crumpled. His threat ended forever. In the sudden silence that followed, Clara heard only her own labored breathing and the ringing in her ears. Then Jacob was there, cradling her against him, his hands gentle as he examined her wound. "It's not deep," he said, voice thick with relief. "Thank God, it's not deep." "Billy?" she asked. "I'm here, ma'am." The young hand knelt beside them, tears tracking through the dirt on his face. "You saved my life." "You're one of us," Clara said simply. "Family protects family." As Mrs. McGinnis arrived with medical supplies, the formidable woman apparently kept a kit ready for such emergencies. Clara looked around at the assembled faces. Tom, battered but alive. The ranch hands, all accounted for. The neighboring ranchers who'd come to help without being asked. And Samuel, standing apart, looking lost and broken. "Samuel," she called softly. He approached hesitantly, like a beaten dog expecting another blow. "Clara, I'm so sorry. This is all my fault. If I hadn't..." You saved my life, she interrupted. Twice tonight. It doesn't make up for... No, Jacob said quietly. It doesn't, but it's a start. The brothers looked at each other, years of pain and anger and grief hanging between them. Then Jacob extended his hand. Samuel took it, and they pulled each other into a fierce embrace. I've got to go, Samuel said when they separated. The law will be looking for me. I can't bring that down on you too. Where will you go? California, maybe. Start over. Try to become the man Mary always believed I could be. Jacob reached into his pocket, pulled out a small leather pouch. Take this. It's not much, but... I can't. You can, you will. Jacob's voice brooked no argument. And Samuel Wright. Let us know you're all right. As Samuel prepared to leave, he stopped beside Clara. Take care of him, he said softly. You're the best thing that ever happened to my brother. Take care of yourself, Clara replied. The world needs men who've learned from their mistakes. Mrs. McGinnis finished bandaging Clara's wound as the first hints of dawn touched the eastern sky. The yard looked like a battlefield, which it had been, but their home still stood. Their people lived. You'll need to rest. Mrs. McGinnis instructed, no heavy work for at least 2 weeks. I'll make sure she follows orders, Jacob said firmly. As the neighbors departed and the hands began clearing the damage, Jacob carried Clara into the house despite her protests. He laid her gently on their bed, then sat beside her, holding her hand. When I saw you fall, he said quietly, I thought my world was ending. I can't lose you. Clara, I won't survive it. You won't lose me, she promised. I'm too stubborn to die. You're too stubborn to do a lot of sensible things, like staying safely hidden when outlaws attack. Would you love me if I was sensible? The word hung between them. Love. They danced around it for weeks, but neither had spoken it aloud. I love you because you're you, Jacob said simply. My brave, impossible, wonderful wife. The woman who throws pitchers at outlaws and saves young cowboys and turns a house into a home. I love you, Clara, more than I ever thought I could love again. Tears blurred Clara's vision. I love you too, my serious, protective, wonderful husband, the man who gave me a chance when the world saw only a mail-order bride. He kissed her then, gentle and sweet, mindful of her injury. When they parted, both were crying and neither cared. No more secrets, Jacob said. No more holding back. We've earned our happiness, both of us. Together, Clara agreed. Outside, the sun rose fully, painting the desert in shades of gold and rose. The night's violence seemed like a bad dream in the soft morning light. But the evidence remained. Bullet holes in walls, blood on the ground. The knowledge that they'd been tested in the crucible of violence and emerged stronger. Clara had arrived in Coyote Springs as a mail-order bride, uncertain and alone, but she'd become so much more. A wife, a partner, a defender of home and hearth. She'd found love not in spite of the hardships, but because of how they'd faced them together. The desert had tried to break her with storms. The town had tried to shame her with scorn. Outlaws had tried to take her by force, but Clara Carter was made of stronger stuff than any of them had guessed. And now, lying in her husband's arms as the new day dawned, she knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as they'd faced everything else. Together, always together. The morning sun streamed through the bedroom window, casting golden light across Clara's face as she carefully changed Jacob's bandages. Though her own wound from the battle 3 weeks ago had healed to a pink scar along her ribs. Jacob's shoulder injury from the fight had been more serious. Hold still, she murmured, cleaning the healing wound with gentle fingers. You're worse than a child about this. I've had worse injuries and tended them myself. Jacob grumbled, but he remained motionless under her ministrations. Yes, and that's why you have so many scars that healed poorly. Clara applied fresh salve, trying not to notice how her touch made his breath catch. "There, all done." "Thank you." He caught her hand as she turned away, pressing it to his lips. "For everything." The past weeks had been a revelation. With both of them recovering from their injuries, they'd been forced to rely on each other in new ways. The walls between them had crumbled entirely, replaced by a tenderness that still sometimes caught Clara by surprise. "Mrs. Carter," Tom's voice called from downstairs. "You've got visitors." Clara smoothed her hair and dress before descending, Jacob following despite her protests that he should rest. In the parlor sat Mrs. McGinnis and, surprisingly, Mrs. Morrison from the bank. And "Clara, dear," Mrs. McGinnis beamed. "How are you feeling?" "Much better, thank you." Clara glanced warily at Mrs. Morrison, who sat stiffly on the edge of her chair. "I've come to—" Mrs. Morrison cleared her throat, clearly uncomfortable. "To apologize for my behavior at your wedding and before." Clara blinked in surprise. "Mrs. Morrison, the whole town's talking about what you did," the banker's wife continued. "How you fought off those outlaws, saved young Billy Morrison, my nephew. His mother asked me to thank you personally. I only did what anyone would do." "No," Mrs. Morrison said firmly. "You did what most of us couldn't. I was wrong about you. Mrs. Carter, you're not some desperate mail-order bride. You're remarkable." The word, the same one Jacob had used, made Clara's throat tight. "Thank you." Which brings us to why we're really here. Mrs. McGinnis interjected, eyes twinkling. "The town council has decided to organize a proper harvest dance. First one since, well, in 3 years. Since Mary died." Clara understood. She glanced at Jacob, saw the tension in his jaw. "And we want you to help organize it." "Mrs. Morrison added, "You and some of the other ranchers' wives. Will you?" Clara felt Jacob's hand on her shoulder, a silent support. "I'd be honored." After the women left, Clara found Jacob on the porch, staring out at the desert. She settled beside him on the bench they'd added, one of many small improvements to make the house more of a home. "Are you all right with this, the dance?" "Mary loved the harvest dance," he said quietly. "She always said it brought the community together. We don't have to participate if—" "No." He turned to her, cupping her face in his calloused hands. "It's time. Time to stop living in the past. Mary would hate that I've turned her memory into a shrine." "She sounds like she was a wise woman." She would have liked you." Jacob smiled softly. "Two strong women who saw past my gruff exterior." Clara leaned into his touch. "I love your gruff exterior, and everything underneath it." The next weeks passed in a blur of activity. Clara threw herself into dance preparations, working alongside women who had once scorned her. Slowly, she felt the community's acceptance settling around her like a warm shawl. The ranch, too, was recovering. They'd retrieved most of the stolen cattle, and neighboring ranchers had helped rebuild the barn. Tom Bradley had hired 2 new hands to replace those who'd fled during the gunfight. The ranch wasn't prospering yet, but it was surviving. One evening, as Clara worked on decorations for the dance, she heard horses approaching. Jacob was still out with the herd, not due back for hours. She reached for the rifle, a habit now, but relaxed when she recognized the rider. "Samuel!" She stepped onto the porch, hardly believing her eyes. He looked better than when he'd left. Cleaner, sober, with a steadiness in his bearing that hadn't been there before. "Clara, I know I shouldn't be here, but I had to come before I left for good." "Jacob's with the herd." "I know. Tom told me." Samuel dismounted, keeping his distance. "I actually came to see you." "Me?" "To thank you, and to give you this." He pulled out an envelope, thick with bills. "It's not all I owe, but it's a start. Sold my guns, my horse, everything but the clothes on my back. Worked the railroad for a month to earn more. Samuel, we don't need— Yes, you do, and I need to do this. He pressed the envelope into her hands. For my own soul as much as anything. Clara accepted it, understanding the pride behind the gesture. Where will you go now? California. Got a job lined up with a mission there, helping Father Miguel tend their gardens. Honest work. He smiled wryly. Who knows? Maybe I'll find God along with vegetables. I think you've already started finding him. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment before Samuel spoke again. Take care of him. Clara, he's lucky to have you. We're lucky to have each other. Samuel mounted his borrowed horse. Tell Jake. Tell him I'm trying to become the man he always wanted me to be. The man Mary believed I could be. I will. Write to us. When I have something worth saying. He tipped his hat. Goodbye, sister. The word made Clara's eyes sting. She watched him ride away, knowing somehow that this time he really would find his redemption. When Jacob returned that evening, she told him about Samuel's visit. He held the money with shaking hands, emotions warring on his face. He's trying, Clara said softly. I know, I just wish— Jacob sighed. I wish it hadn't taken so much pain to get here. Pain has a way of teaching us what matters, Clara said, thinking of her own journey. Sometimes it's the only teacher we'll listen to. The night of the harvest dance arrived crisp and clear. Clara stood before the mirror, wearing a new dress blue silk that brought out her eyes, a gift from Jacob that must have cost more than they could afford. You're beautiful, he said from the doorway, and the raw appreciation in his voice made her blush like a new bride. You clean up rather well yourself, she replied, admiring his dark suit and freshly shaved face. The town hall was transformed with autumn leaves, cornstalks, and the decorations Clara and the other women had crafted. Lanterns cast a warm glow, and the sound of fiddle music spilled into the night. Their entrance caused a stir. Clara felt the eyes on them, but for once, the whispers seemed admiring rather than cruel. The Carters. Doesn't she look lovely? Heard she's the best shot in the territory now. Jake looks happy. Been too long since we've seen that. They were welcomed warmly. And Clara found herself swept into the community's embrace. Women who had snubbed her now sought her opinions. Men who had dismissed her now tipped their hats with genuine respect. But the best moment came when Jacob led her onto the dance floor for the first waltz. He held her like she was precious, guiding her through the steps with surprising grace. Where did you learn to dance? She asked. Mary taught me, he said, and for the first time, speaking his late wife's name brought a smile rather than pain. She said every man should know how to properly dance with his wife. She was right. Usually was. He spun her, then drew her close again. Clara, I need to tell you something. Her heart skipped. What is it? I've been thinking about the future, our future. The ranch is doing better, and with Samuel's money and what we've saved— He took a breath. I want to build you a real home, not just fix up the old one, but build something new, something that's ours. Jacob, we don't need— Maybe not, but I want to give it to you anyway. A home without ghosts, without closed doors, a place for us to build our life together. Maybe even fill it with children someday. The hope in his voice made her eyes well. I'd like that, all of it. There's more. He stopped dancing, right there in the middle of the floor, and dropped to one knee. The music stuttered to a halt as everyone turned to stare. Clara Matthews Carter, Jacob said, loud enough for all to hear. You came to me as a mail-order bride, and we married as strangers keeping a bargain. But I want to ask you now, in front of everyone, with full hearts instead of empty promises. Will you marry me again? Will you choose me? Not because you have to, but because you want to. Clara's hands flew to her mouth. Around them, the entire town held its breath.
"Yes," she said, laughing and crying at once. "Yes, 1,000 times yes."
The hall erupted in cheers as Jacob swept her into his arms, kissing her soundly in front of everyone. Even Mrs. Morrison was dabbing at her eyes. "Well, I'll be," someone muttered. That mail-order bride turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to Jake Carter. Later, as they danced again, Clara spotted a familiar figure at the window, Samuel, watching from the shadows. She nudged Jacob, who followed her gaze. The brothers shared a long look, and Samuel raised his hand in farewell. Then he was gone, headed for his new life, leaving them to theirs. "No more looking back," Jacob murmured in her ear. "Only forward," Clara agreed. The stars wheeled overhead as the dance continued. Clara had arrived in Coyote Springs as a desperate woman fleeing an impossible situation. She'd been scorned as a mail-order bride, tested by the harsh desert, bloodied by violence. But she'd also found love, earned respect, and built a home. She'd helped heal the wounds between brothers and brought a grieving man back to life. She'd proven that sometimes the most unlikely beginnings could lead to the most beautiful endings. "I love you, Mrs. Carter," Jacob whispered as they swayed together. "And I love you, Mr. Carter," she replied, meaning it with every fiber of her being. The mail-order bride from Boston had found her home at last. Not in a place, but in the arms of the man who'd learned to love her as fiercely as she loved him. And that was worth every tear, every trial, every moment of doubt that had brought them to this point. The desert had tested them. Life had scarred them. But love, true, deep, abiding love, had healed them both. And that was the greatest miracle of all. Spring arrived in New Mexico with a whisper of green across the desert and the sweet scent of sage blossoms on the wind. Clara stood on the porch of their new home, one hand resting on her swelling belly, watching as Jacob directed the ranch hands in setting the final roof beam. The house had risen from the earth over the winter months, built with love and sweat and dreams made tangible, larger than the old one but not ostentatious, with wide windows to catch the desert light and a wraparound porch perfect for watching sunsets. Every board, every nail had been chosen with care, creating not just a house, but a true home. "Easy now, boys," Tom Bradley called out. "That's the last one. Let's get her settled proper." Clara smiled, remembering how the whole community had rallied to help. Even Mrs. Morrison had arrived one day with her sleeves rolled up, ready to work. The mail-order bride who'd once been scorned had become one of their own, and the town had shown it in the most practical way possible, with hammers and saws and willing hands. "You should be resting, Mrs. McGinnis said, appearing at Clara's elbow with her ever-present medical bag. "That baby's due any day now."
"I can't rest. Too excited."
Clara rubbed her belly as the baby kicked.
"We're finally home. Truly home."
"And about time for that second wedding," Jacob promised. Mrs. McGinnis winked. "The whole town's been waiting." Indeed, they'd planned it all. A real wedding this time, with Clara in a proper wedding dress instead of travel-worn blue, with joy instead of uncertainty, with the whole community celebrating rather than judging. It would take place as soon as the house was complete. A new beginning in every sense. "Letter for you, Mrs. Carter," young Billy Morrison called out, riding up with the mail. He'd become their regular courier, proud to serve the woman who'd saved his life. Clara's heart leaped, seeing the California postmark. Samuel's letters had become more frequent over the months, chronicling his transformation from broken drunk to dedicated mission worker. "Dear sister," she read aloud to Mrs. McGinnis. "The vegetables are thriving, as am I. Father Miguel says I have a gift for making things grow." Imagine that. The man who once couldn't keep a promise alive now tends a garden that feeds dozens. "I have enclosed something special. Use it for the new house. or for the little one, an uncle's privilege to spoil his nephew or niece. Give Jake my love. Tell him I've finally become a man worth claiming as brother. Your devoted brother, Samuel. Inside was a banknote that made Clara gasp. He must have saved every penny for months. Family, Mrs. McGinnis said simply, nothing stronger in this world. As the sun began to set, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson, the ranch hands secured the final beam. A cheer went up, and Clara felt tears prick her eyes. Their home was complete. Jacob swung down from the roof with the agility of a man half his age, crossing to Clara in long strides. His face was dirty, his shirt soaked with sweat, but his eyes shone with joy. "Welcome home, Mrs. Carter," he said, pulling her carefully into his arms. "Welcome home, Mr. Carter," she replied, not caring that he was getting dust all over her dress. That evening, as they walked through the empty rooms of their new house, Jacob showed her every detail: the kitchen with its modern stove and deep sink, the parlor with windows facing the sunset, the bedrooms waiting to be filled with children's laughter. "And this," he said, opening a door at the end of the hall, "is yours." Clara stepped inside and gasped. It was a library, small but perfect, with built-in shelves already holding the books she'd brought from Boston and new ones besides. A comfortable chair sat by the window, a writing desk in the corner. "Jacob," she breathed. "How did you—" "Tom helped, said you missed having a proper place for your books." He rubbed his neck, suddenly shy. "I know it's not like the grand libraries in Boston, but—" She silenced him with a kiss. "It's perfect. You're perfect." "Far from it," he said when they parted. "But I'm trying to be the man you deserve." "You already are." 3 days later, on a morning bright with promise, Clara's labor began. Mrs. McGinnis took charge, shooing Jacob out with the efficiency of long practice. "But," he protested. "No buts. You've got a wedding to prepare for. This little one has timing. I'll give them that. Now go." And indeed, the baby seemed determined to arrive before the afternoon ceremony. Clara gripped the bedsheets, riding waves of pain with the same determination that had carried her through sandstorms and gunfights. "You're doing fine, dear," Mrs. McGinnis soothed. "Strong as your mother. This one will be." Just as the church bells began to ring, announcing the wedding hour, a new cry joined their song. Clara sobbed with relief and joy as Mrs. McGinnis placed the squalling infant in her arms. "A daughter," the midwife announced. "Healthy and loud as a wildcat." "A daughter," Clara repeated in wonder, touching the baby's perfect fingers, her rosebud mouth. "Oh, Jacob needs to—" "Right here," her husband said from the doorway, having ignored all protocols to race back at the first cry. His face was soft with awe as he approached the bed. "She's beautiful, just like her mother." "What shall we name her?" Clara asked, shifting so he could sit beside them. Jacob was quiet for a moment, then smiled. "Hope, Hope Mary Carter. For the future and for the past that brought us together. Hope." Clara agreed, tears flowing freely. "It's perfect." An hour later, the strangest wedding procession Coyote Springs had ever seen made its way to the church. Clara, freshly dressed in her wedding gown, rode in a specially cushioned wagon, cradling baby Hope. Jacob rode alongside on horseback, unable to stop grinning. The whole town had gathered, turning what was meant to be a simple ceremony into a grand celebration. Reverend Mills, the same man who'd married them that first time with such reluctance, now beamed as they stood before him again. "Dearly beloved," he began, "we gather today to witness something rare and beautiful, a couple choosing to marry again, not from necessity but from love. Clara and Jacob have already made their vows once, but today they make them anew, with full hearts and a daughter to witness their commitment. Clara handed Hope to Mrs. McGinnis and took Jacob's hands. In the front row sat Tom Bradley, proud as any father, behind him. The ranch hands who'd become family. The townspeople who'd gone from scorning to celebrating her. All the threads of their life woven together. "Clara," Jacob said, his voice strong and clear. "You arrived in dust and tears, a stranger seeking shelter, but you became my salvation. You taught me to live again, to love again, to hope again. I promise to cherish you, to protect you, to stand beside you through whatever storms may come. You're not my mail-order bride. You're my chosen wife, my partner, my heart, today and always." Clara had to swallow hard before she could speak. "Jacob, you offered me a business arrangement and gave me a love story. You promised me shelter and gave me a home. You took a frightened woman and helped her become strong. I promise to stand with you, to build with you, to love you through drought and plenty, through quiet years and troubled ones. You're not just my husband. You're my best friend, my protector, my heart, today and always." This time, when Reverend Mills pronounced them husband and wife, Jacob's kiss was neither perfunctory nor desperate. It was the kiss of a man who knew exactly what he had and treasured it. As they turned to face the congregation, Hope began to fuss. Clara took her daughter back, and the three of them stood together, a family forged from unlikely beginnings but strong as the desert earth. The celebration that followed lasted well into the night. The new house threw open its doors to all, christened with laughter and music and joy. Clara changed from her wedding dress into something more practical, but kept her mother's veil on. The delicate lace that had seen her through her journey, now a symbol of traditions honored and renewed. As the evening wound down, Clara found herself on the porch with Jacob, Hope sleeping peacefully in her arms. The desert stretched endlessly before them, but it no longer seemed forbidding. It was simply home. "Any regrets?" Jacob asked softly. "Not one." Clara replied, "Well, maybe one." He looked at her in alarm. "What?" "I wish we'd taken a photograph today, for Hope, when she's older, so she can see how her parents chose each other." "We'll take one tomorrow," Jacob promised. "And the day after? As many as you want. We've got time now, all the time in the world." A coyote called in the distance, that once lonely sound that had frightened Clara in her early days. Now it seemed almost welcoming, a reminder of the wild beauty of this place they'd claimed together. "I love you, Mr. Carter," Clara said, leaning into his warmth. "And I love you, Mrs. Carter," he replied, pressing a kiss to her hair. The mail-order bride who'd arrived in dust and tears had found more than a home for her heart. She'd found a life worth living, a love worth fighting for, and a future bright with promise. The desert had tested them, shaped them, scarred them, but ultimately, it had blessed them. And as the stars wheeled overhead in the vast New Mexico sky, Clara Matthews Carter knew that every hard mile, every tear shed, every battle fought had been worth it for this moment, standing with her husband and daughter on the porch of their home, finally and forever where they belonged. The end had become a beginning, and the beginning had become a beautiful life. And that, Clara thought as she kissed her daughter's downy head, was the greatest love story of all. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope it touched your heart as much as it touched mine while sharing it. Please leave a comment below and let me know where in the world you're listening from. I'd love to connect with you and hear your thoughts about Clara and Jacob's journey. If you enjoyed this tale of love conquering all odds in the Wild West, please subscribe to Wild West Night. Hit that like button, and don't forget to press the hype button to help more people discover this story. Your support means the world to me, and I can't wait to share more frontier love stories with you. Until next time, partners.